Residential Report Writing and Case Studies, Chapter 7, Narrative Appraisal Reports, Property Description. You can label the property description the property appraised, the subject property, the property that is the subject of this appraisal, or any similar title. It can follow the certification page and be the starting point for addressing most of the USPAP requirements. You will describe the property in narrative form and in much more detail later in the appraisal report. Early on, you describe the property briefly so the intended user can confirm you appraise the correct property and understood its basic physical characteristics. This property description should be short, but contain information, documents, and/or exhibits sufficient to identify the real estate involved in the appraisal, including the physical, legal, and economic property characteristics relevant to the assignment. A brief but not all-encompassing list of items to include would be the address of the property, including city, borough, township, county, and state as appropriate. The size of the site in square feet or acres. Optionally, you can add the tax map lot and block number. A brief description of the existing or proposed improvements and state if existing or proposed. An explanation of any personal property, trade fixtures, or intangible items that are included in the valuation. An explanation of the subject being a fractional interest, physical segment, or partial holding. Other descriptions such as easements or restrictions that you feel necessary and appropriate. The appraisal foundation forms blah, 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 something standard 2, end of page. Residential Report Writing and Case Studies, Chapter 7, Narrative Appraisal Reports. USPAP required items that can be stated. According to the 2020 through 2021 edition of USPAP, the following items must be included but can be stated in the appraisal report. These items do not need to be summarized unless such a summary or description is necessary for intended users to understand the report. The type of appraisal report being provided, appraisal report or restricted appraisal report. The identity of the client, the identity of any other intended users by name or type, the intended use of the appraisal, the real property interest appraised, the type and definition of value, and cite the source of the definition, the effective date of the appraisal and the date of the report, the use of the real estate existing as of the effective date, and the use of the real estate reflected in the appraisal, all extraordinary assumptions and hypothetical conditions, and state that their use might have affected the assignment results. You may elect to simply state the type of value, such as market value, on a summary page, and then define it and provide the source of the definition later in the appraisal report. If you do this, it is recommended that you indicate that it is provided later within the appraisal report, so the intended user does not think you failed to provide it, and indicate the page and location of the definition and source. End of page. Residential report writing and case studies. Chapter 7, narrative appraisal reports. Problem to be solved. Usually, you can clearly describe and explain the problem that you are solving in 1, 2, or 3 sentences. A good way to explain the problem is to describe what you have been charged to do. You have been charged to develop your opinion about something for a specific purpose. For example, the problem to be solved by the appraiser in this appraisal report is to provide an estimate of the current, retrospective/prospective market value of the least fee interest of the subject property for tax assessment appeal purposes. How you define the problem to be solved is critical, as it impacts what you will do, as well as what you will include in or exclude from the scope of work. End of page. Residential report writing and case studies. Chapter 7, narrative appraisal reports. Scope of work. The scope of work describes what you did to solve the appraisal problem. A well-written scope of work statement instills confidence in the intended user that you have produced an evidence-based, credible report and opinion of value. The scope of work statement provides a thorough written account of the materials and data you examined, steps you took, research you conducted, inspections you made, market investigations you performed. Appraisal techniques and methods you employed, and anything else you used or did to develop the opinion of value. While you can explain the scope of work in various places throughout the report, it will be more clearly understood by the intended user if it is provided and described in its own properly indicated section of the report. Otherwise, it may get lost among the other information in the report. The scope of work can, and where appropriate, should also identify information you did not use and actions you did not take. Oftentimes, an intended user has significant knowledge about appraising. Explaining why you did not do something may answer a question that could be in the intended user's mind. If you were prevented from doing something, such as being denied access to inspect the property's interior, you should note that. If you felt that one or more of the 3 approaches to value was inappropriate, you can explain that here. For example, the age of the subject property in combination with its unusual physical characteristics severely impacted the appraiser's ability to accurately estimate the property's replacement cost and depreciation. Accordingly, the use of the cost approach to value was excluded, as it would not have produced a reliable or meaningful result in valuing the subject property. Any extraordinary assumptions or hypothetical conditions will affect the scope of work. While USPAP requires that they be clearly and conspicuously stated and explained, USPAP does not mandate where Therefore, you can also identify them in the scope of work or optionally elsewhere within the appraisal report. Best practice would be to explain them just prior to explaining your scope of work, within the scope of work, or immediately following it, so that the intended user can readily connect the use of these assumptions with your need to use and explain them with the scope of work. End of page.